Welcome to the Good Day at Work podcast. I'm your host, Vikkie Buxton-Cope.
And I'm also your host, Ben Moss. In this podcast series, we'll be exploring the nuances of workplace health and wellbeing through a series of conversations with those who are out there helping to create good days at work within their organisations.
So, what makes a good day at work? Let's find out. Welcome to the Good Day at Work podcast. Today we're joined by Dr. John Hamilton, Chief People Officer at Bellrock Group. He's dual qualified chartered HR and safety practitioner with a passion for making a difference to the working lives of employees. He has a progressive and transformational approach to developing and executing an organisation's people strategy to enable the delivery of its strategic objectives and growth agenda. With a background in property management, his career developed through health and safety to people and organisational development. His experience of successfully delivering people, risk and governance strategies reaches across property, banking, retail, service, education and voluntary sectors. His approach blends a people-centred and commercially focused approach to delivering a growth strategy, ensuring a robust, fit-for-purpose organisation that can grow with the business. Bellrock Group's a fast-growing property and facilities management company operating in the UK. It's a pioneering and tech-led approach to service delivery across a range of FM consultancy and technology services and products. A £200 million business, it has 1,600 employees operating across the UK. It's private equity owned, so driving a high growth agenda through organic growth and through merger and acquisitions. Welcome, John. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Hi, Vikkie.
Hi. So we're joined by Ben Moss, MD of Robertson Cooper as well. Thank you, Ben.
Hi.
Hi, Ben.
So without further ado, I think we just can dive into some questions if you're all right with that, John.
Yeah, absolutely. That intro makes me sound very old, Vikkie. Like when you read that list, I feel very old all of a sudden. So.
Very experienced, I think, is the way that we like to say it.
Yeah, I'll take that.
We've got lots to dig into by the sounds of it anyway.
Yeah.
So really looking forward to having the discussion today. So John, you're the Chief People Officer at Bellrock Group, but you haven't always been that. Tell us the journey about kind of from property management through to health and safety to Chief People Officer.
Yeah, so I started as a facilities manager, running a number of corporate accounts for an FM business. And that overlaps massively. When you do that kind of job, health and safety is kind of intrinsic to that. And I joined a high street bank as head of facilities, and then kind of complained so much about the state of their health and safety they gave it me to do, which is there's a bit of a theme here. Is I spot an opportunity, and then that took me to health and safety, which I love because I discovered I love to make a difference to people. I love knowing that what I've done that day is quite an altruistic thing, really. And that sat really well with me. So I did that for some time, left the bank, went to work at a university for a number of years, and then got back into the kind of commercial sector as well. And then while I was at the university, the safety team we were part of HR, and I became much more closely involved in HR, particularly on an OD side. So from an employee engagement, particularly around ED&I, there's a big overlap. I got heavily involved in wellbeing. So the natural fit between wellbeing and HR and occupational health, and it just fitted really well for me. So I became chartered CIPD member when I was at university, and really that kind of positioned me between safety and HR. And then when I joined Bellrock, I actually joined in a safety role, but quite quickly the conversation with the board was, look, there's definitely an opportunity to do a better job of our people strategy. The HR team were kind of under resourced. We didn't have an OD function. We didn't have any learning and development activity. There was very much a transactional approach to HR. Amazing team, but just didn't have the bandwidth to really do that added value stuff that you need for a transformative organisation, particularly an organisation like Bellrock, because we're so fast growing. We're not very old. We're 25 years old, but for about 17 of those years, we were just about a company of about 500 or 600 people. And then being private equity owned, it's a kind of buy and build process. So it's about fast growth. And the classic challenge that we have is scaling up central support functions, whether it's HR, whether it's IT, whether it's finance, to meet that growth. And the HR was massively behind the curve. But what an opportunity, because I knew what good looked like. I'd worked for some really big organizations that did that had great, fantastic people agendas, and I just knew exactly what would work with the team that I had. So yeah, that's kind of where I am. I'm Chief People Officer. I've got a fantastic HR team, and a really transformative, progressive agenda for people, because we're not hampered by how we've done things previously, because we haven't done stuff previously. We've just got this great opportunity to go, okay, we've got to design, let's say, a DE&I strategy. What's the best way of doing it? Not hampered by how we might have done something 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite an unusual route in a way. When I was looking at your history, your CV, because a lot of organisations would benefit from somebody who's been on your route, because usually you get this issue of health and safety, well-being, what the broader people agenda being kind of siloed, and health and safety being it's in its own place, run in its own way, with the Cushy agenda, HR kind of to the side of it, people trying to bring it together. But you're almost like a natural antidote to that, I guess. Have you found that a sort of natural thing to do at Bellrock, in terms of having had that journey behind you?
Yeah, completely. I mean, and also I was an operational facilities manager back in the day, and I now work for a facilities management business. So I'm really pragmatic in the way I do my job, and whether that's with the safety hat on, nobody likes that kind of hard hat wearing, clipboard holding safety person that walks around wagging their finger at you, right? You've got to be pragmatic around the business, and the same with HR as well. Sometimes we have really pragmatic conversations around, how the business is developing and growing, and I kind of understand the pressure points that my colleagues have got. So, it's about how we can fulfill and enable that. To your point, Ben, about the kind of a safety, well-being, HR alignment. It's, from my perspective, it's all about the people. So it doesn't really matter which hat you wear. It's about behavioural change for managers, about better caring for their people, better engaging their people, and it's the same with safety. It's about behavioural change. It's about trying to persuade people to do things they don't really want to do sometimes, and that's the same in my HR world. Much of the challenge we have with managers might be helping them have a difficult conversation with their colleagues, which they avoid in the same way they avoid maybe following safety processes. It's about motivating, engaging, inspiring them to do that. And it doesn't really matter which hat it is. It's the same kind of philosophy.
Well, it's, I think, yeah, exactly. Very often it's common antecedents, isn't it? It might be a psychosocial antecedent, or a physical safety antecedent to a bad outcome. It's about seeing that as one piece, but you will know yourself that very many organisations are not there yet, because, like you say, if you've got an opportunity and that you haven't done everything before, you can start from a blank slate. In that sense, a lot of organisations are so embedded in health and safety there, health and well-being there, and they're not thinking health, safety, and well-being. They're thinking health and safety and health and well-being, and it's a hard thing to bring that together retrospectively.
Yeah, it is, and I think if I look back at my time, I worked at Leeds Beckett as head of safety, health, and well-being for 8 years, and when I look back at some of the stuff we did in the early days, we were well ahead of our time in terms of some of the engagement, some of the ways we were looking to engage our employees in that conversation and in that debate. And it's partly really where I came from at the back of the bank. We out of bad times come good, and we had a local authority investigation into stress not long after the stress management standards came out, and the work that we did on our response to that actually ended up becoming cited as good practice in the management standards guidance, which then was a springboard to then the stuff that we did, and case studies and what have you. We've had a really interesting journey over the time, really positively engaging people. But actually, I don't think necessarily the wider world the narrative was there across employers, and it's such a different place now. Like, you look at the conversations we have around mental health in the workplace that we just would not have had even 10 years ago. And it's really encouraging. I feel really fortunate to be where I am in my career, that I'm seeing this kind of world opening up for us to have really positive conversations about it.
Certainly. Well, there's a bit of a theme here, John. I feel like you kind of tend to turn challenges into opportunities wherever you are, which is really great. And it sounds like definitely back in the Leeds Beckett days, you were ahead of the curve, because we talk to so many clients who are still struggling with that integration piece, and obviously, as you said at Bellrock, having the opportunity to do it the way that you wanted to do it, because those with the growth essential services weren't there, then it sounds like you've turned it into to an opportunity, and it's working for you. So that's great. We mentioned in the introduction that you've worked in a range of sectors. So I'll just recap all of those, which I think covers. So there's property, banking, retail, service, education, and voluntary sectors. What would be interesting, I think, when you look at all of them, what's the universal thing that kind of underpins? So we talk about good days at work, don't we? What universal thing that underpinned having a good day at work for you and for employees, if you can try and find some sort of common thread?
Yeah, I think with the safety hat on, I was driven by the fact that I wanted people to go home as healthy and as injury free as they turned up that morning. That was your mission, really. It sounds very basic, but it was a pretty appalling that the thought that work was having that effect on people. In an HR world, it's more subtle. It's about helping people helping them be the best version of themselves. So whether that's just in a very basic form of them doing the job from a kind of performance management perspective, or actually more sort of transformational around their own career arc and growth. It's all about adding value to the people, to those, and that's kind of on a spectrum, really. So your safety and well-being at one end, but really, I suppose it's a bit like Maslow's triangle, isn't it? Above that is that more value add, that more self-fulfillment, self-esteem. I mean, we're doing a lot of work on talent mapping at the moment in Bellrock. Talent mapping at sort of top 250 people across the business. And what's wonderful about it is actually giving managers the clear space to step back from the day-to-day and have a conversation about where their colleagues are, where their team are on, in terms of their performance, in terms of their potential, and where might we take them, what opportunities might we give them. So that feels like the transformational end. But from a safety end, it really was just making sure people were, safe, healthy, particularly in working in the bank. It's a pretty low risk safety environment, but pretty high risk psychological safety environment from a work stress perspective. I'm not sure that answers your question, Vikkie. There is a theme, but it's probably more a spectrum of human needs, really. At the one end, that need for fulfillment, at the other end, the basic need to go home without having injured yourself.
Yeah, and there's that feeling. There's also, it's that balance, isn't it? That people want to feel like they're getting stuff done, like they've achieved something. That's if you like, one level of fulfillment, but the other is purpose and meaning, and the more cultural end of it, the connection to what the business is there to do and what the business's mission and values are. So there's different levels, isn't there? And probably some people will come in one day and want to feel more like they're just getting stuff done and want to feel like they're ticking stuff off their to-do list, but there's always that background thing. Or another day they may feel like they're just thinking about, why am I here? What is this? What am I contributing to the bigger thing? And it's being able to encompass all of that in a way.
Also, let's not forget just fun and joy and positive experience and emotions, because we spend a lot of our lives at work, don't we? So I think sometimes it sounds really basic and simple, but I'm a bit of a fan of actually sometimes the basic and the simple can kind of get overlooked. And I think that we do a lot of work with clients digging into the workplace pressures that they're facing. So we do that organizational level at team level. And, one thing that's been coming through since the pandemic, quite a lot that we see is job enjoyment and happiness comes through as something that's kind of blocking employee well-being. So I think and it's funny because when we tell clients that in the feedback, it's like, oh, what are we going to do? What do we do about that? And actually, is that our job?
You know, Vicky, you're absolutely right. But some of the things are just really basic, simple stuff. And, we're an amazing business. Like most of our people are spread nationwide. We're not a massive head office type business. We employ, frontline caterers, cleaners, security guards, facilities managers, project managers, software developers, so such a rich variation of people across our business. And what unites them is a love for the people they work with. I've just closed our staff survey and looking at the initial results with managers the last couple of weeks. We do the difficult stuff really well. Like in the survey, our people love the people they work with. They really respect their manager. They've got a manager that cares about them. They love the variety in their job. They bring their best effort to work every day. Like if that stuff was wrong, that'd be impossible to fix, or that'd be impossible in a business our size to fix that. But our managers don't show enough appreciation for their staff sometimes. They don't always arrange face-to-face time with them as often as they should. Their PDRs aren't always as meaningful as they need to be. And you go, but that stuff should be really easy to fix.
Yeah.
We're doing the difficult stuff really well.
Yeah.
Your staff generally they're really happy. They're very well engaged. But what will make them more engaged is if you just show, it's just like, but that should be dead straightforward to fix. Whereas that other stuff's like really hard, but we seem to do that stuff really well. So, it's overall a positive story, but we could be better, and we could be better in some really simple, straightforward ways.
Yeah, well, that's not a bad place to be. Like you say, the other way around is much harder to deal with.
Oh yeah, no, it's a great starting point, but it's great for me to have that conversation with managers. Like, you're doing a really great job.
Yeah,
you could just do an even better job. You could do it.
Yeah.
Well, you're doing a really good job, right? But you could do a great job.
You could do a great. That's what. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like from what you say, John, that there's a really strong culture at Bellrock, and like you say, some of those things that you're talking about there, how people feel about each other, feel about the company. It's that's all testament to kind of some of the stuff that you've got in place. But quite interested to talk a little bit more about the Bellrock culture. Being a group, do you find that it kind of differs across the group?
Yeah. Massively, and like our biggest challenge is the fact that we're an acquisition business. So we're acquiring 3 to 4 businesses a year. Typically, it's quite fairly small businesses. They might be 25, 30 people, but sometimes as big as 100 or so. So, and they tend to be owner operator, small consultancies or local, small providers, that fit our business model really well. So they bring a set of services or geographic referenceability that we don't have. That's why we would acquire them. But we would also acquire them because they're successful. And if they're successful, that usually means they've got a really strong culture. And it's quite often it feels like a family. It's like a small family culture. And it's quite a culture shock coming to us when we're 1,600 employees. But what we don't do is say, this is how Bellrock does it. You've got to fit in. Right. What we do is we make every effort to understand their culture and take the best of it into Bellrock. So there's lots of examples of where we've bought organisations and looked at them and thought, oh, I really like what they do. Like, and you can't always translate that to a large national business, but you want to capture the essence of what they're doing in the way that they communicate, the way that they engage, the way they recognise their colleagues. It can be really simple ways. Sometimes it can be policy type stuff. We've been held to account around things like family leave. We've had to, improve the way that we provide paid time off for carers and for paternity, maternity, adoption pay. So there is a Bellrock culture that's driven by our values, but it's not so rigid and flexible that says, okay, you're another company that we've bought. This is how we do it.
Yeah, well, that sounds like a great way to constantly evolve and stay in the driving seat in terms of attracting the best talent, isn't it? If you're kind of taking all the best bits from all the new businesses, then
totally, yeah. It's like free consultancy, Vikkie. It's great.
It's a great model.
You get a case study, and let's face it, not everything they do is great, particularly process-wise, because they're often small businesses that are coming in. They haven't had the resources, so the stuff that we can definitely lend to them. And then you go, oh, I love the way you do that. That thing you do at 4 o'clock every Friday afternoon with your people or whatever, whatever it might be. You go, how can we how can we do something with that?
So how have you kind of, because that's the upside of it. The risk is, of course, that you end up with a bit of a hodgepodge and you lose that core central identity of Bellrock. How do you ensure that enough comes from the centre the other way to make sure it all feels like one group, but with certain differences in certain areas?
Yeah, well, we did a big culture and values piece about 18 months ago in the business, and we did some work with a really fantastic employee branding organisation that, and I was totally skeptical about how they would develop an employer brand and employee value proposition in such a varied business. But they did a whole load of focus groups and surveys with the business, and came back with three strands. Really, it doesn't really matter where you are or what you do in our business. There are three things that unite us all, and that's the fact that we're people, and the survey shows that we love the people that we work with. The fact that we love the autonomy and the diversity of, or the autonomy that we're given to do the job the way we want to do it, and we love the diversity and variability that our jobs have in it. And doesn't matter which aspect of property and facilities management you work in, no 2 days are going to be the same. So, and that was revolutionary for our mindset around, okay, so how do we sell the business to future, prospective employees wanting to join us, and how do we orientate ourselves internally around that narrative, around what it's like to be a Bellrock person? So suddenly our staff awards becomes aligned to that narrative. Our performance management, our career pathway, all becomes aligned to a narrative that talks about our values, our culture. So people coming in will understand who we are, both in terms of organically wanting to join us as a colleague, but also through acquisition, coming in, the first presentations and one-to-ones we do with people. We say, look, this is who we are. Not the corporate website that says what to sell, but who are we? What sort of company are we? What do we aspire to be?
I saw your belonging at Bellrock D&I piece. Is that an example of that?
Yeah, completely. And D&I, we are definitely late to the party on D&I. It's part of that maturity, that becoming a bigger business. It's the direction you go in. And us, me omitting that as me being kind of totally transparent around where we are. But the transformation we're going through in terms of that narrative, we launched our strategy on the day before International Women's Day in March. We had over 300 people on the call for that. We featured a panel of all women talking about what it's like to be a woman working in our industry, in property and facilities, the obstacles they've had, the people that have supported and mentored them on their route. And that was amazing response. We've then built a new D&I steering group that's now putting together the action plan. In fact, I was with them all this week for half a day building our action plan. And then last week we followed up our next webinar was Pride, and we talked a lot about inclusion. I shared a lot about our staff survey results, and we segmented them for different characteristics and communities, so we could understand the difference in responses between people who might be LGBTQ or women, or people from an ethnic minority, or people with a disability. And that's been really stark. The learning we've taken from that has been at times uncomfortable about how some of those groups, colleagues feel, but it's shining light on it, and that allows us to do something about it. So that's probably the most transformational we are this year, Ben. We've fixed a lot of things that we needed to do over the last couple of years that big businesses need to do. It's now D&I and the transformational stuff, and we're not any worse than another employer in our space in terms of diversity, but we're sure as hell not any better, and that's my mission.
Yeah, and it's a really strong brand and a strong message to what you've done there. I've seen you posting about that on LinkedIn, and it seemed like a really strong start.
Yeah, it has to be authentic, and if you went to our careers website, which is bellrockjobs.com, on the top right hand corner is the Women at Bellrock feature that's there from International Women's Day, and it's a profile of probably a dozen, if not more, of our very, very prominent women in our business at all levels, who talk very openly and honestly about what's led to their success, what supported them. They're not kind of day in the life stories. They're really probing questions around, what they've found successful, what their experiences are. And that's a real template for us now. We will be building an LGBTQ plus community. We will be talking more about disability. We've not talked about disability at all in our business, and the staff survey results show that. They show the fact that people with a disability are more disenfranchised, are less engaged, and I'm pretty ashamed about that data, but that sure as hell fires me up to make a difference.
Yeah, and absolutely. The fact of the matter is that you've done the work to find out in the first place, which not everybody's asking the questions, are they? Because once you ask the questions and you get the results, there's a real responsibility to do something about it. So I think that's you're taking the right approach there in terms of in terms of looking at what's going on, how people are feeling, and how you can address that. And that's kind of all we can do in evolving businesses, can't we? That's what you've got to do continuously.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's some real positive signs that even having the narrative is having an effect. So I'll give you an example. So for the first time in a staff survey, we asked people to tell us what their gender identity was, whether they felt they were part of the LGBTQ plus community, whether they considered that they had a disability or not, and what their ethnicity was. And I was really worried asking that people wouldn't trust us, because we run the survey in-house, right? So we're not paying someone else to do it. So there's already a big trust factor in that, let alone giving that information, which is super, super sensitive. And I did some analysis. Only 5% of our survey respondees skipped those questions. And of those that answered it, only 7% answered preferred not to say, which blew my mind. Like, it was that is so important for us, because that gives us such a large pot of data. Like, if half the people had only answered those questions, you start to get into pots of data that aren't really that significant. But when it's half, when it's like 90% of your employees, but most importantly, I think that says a lot of trust. That puts a lot of trust in us. I trust you as my employer with that information, and that you will use it responsibly, and that you will use that data for the purposes of driving forward improvement. So absolutely thrilled with that. Less happy with some of the results, but just that statement with it was like, wow, the people really believe in us.
That doesn't that speak of high levels of psychological safety in the background culture? That's a great start. That's a great place to be as a starting point. It means look, everything like health and safety, well-being, nobody's got everything right. No, everybody, not that many years ago, we were at year zero we were talking about stress management into only, and not positive well-being, and the ways in which health and well-being can create positive outcomes. It was all a negative defensive piece. That journey started somewhere. It actually started with measuring. Actually start with understanding the problem. And, again, that was being done in different cultures, some of which were relatively psychologically safe, some were very psychologically unsafe. And I think, I think that's a great takeaway from that starting point. Yeah, you've got work to do, but, the fact that they want to talk to you about it, and that you've created a space where they feel they can talk to you about it, I feel that's a great starting point.
And we saw that on the Pride webinar last week. There was nearly 200 people on that call. Now, I know from the proportions of people that answered the staff survey question about being a member of the LGBTQ plus community, that's probably, we've probably got, I don't know, 50 to 80 people from the LGBTQ plus community in our business. If you apply, extrapolate that out to our population. So let's say it's 50 to 80. We had 200 people on the call. So that's an awful lot of people who are allies to that community, who it really matters to them that inclusion is important to us. Even though it was a webinar about Pride, and even though we were talking specifically about LGBTQ+, the lessons that we were learning collectively, and I had people stop me afterwards, go, I didn't know that, I didn't know this. And I was the same. So we talked there about the importance of lanyards or badges or stickers on laptops, rainbow badges. And this is my ignorance, right? I guess I'm a bit sorry for it, but I'm not, because you've got to learn, right? So I thought that was a promotional thing. I didn't realise that was all about creating a safe space for you to have a conversation with me about about your about whether or not you want to tell me that you went out with your partner the weekend, and you're worried about mentioning whether they're a he or she, because you might not, you come, and somebody said to me, I'm coming out to you every time I have a conversation with her, I'm coming out. And if you're wearing a lanyard or you've got a sticker on your laptop, it's a fair indication to me that you are an ally to LGBTQ plus, and it creates that safe space for me. That blew me away, and I'm sure there'll be people watching this going, well, yeah, duh. And I'm going, no, but there's lots of people just did not understand the significance.
Absolutely, yeah. I think this is the important thing, isn't it? Because I think that the thing is, it's having these conversations and people, holding their hands up and saying, I didn't know that. I'm glad I do now, though, because especially someone in your position, John. What can you do with that now? What can you do with that information? How can you, kind of translate that into many other areas as well where that might be helpful? I think it's really interesting. I think the kind of creating the psychologically safe space is kind of where it all kind of comes back to. And a lot of work that we're doing at the moment with clients is with leaders and managers directly, because obviously, given they create a lot of that space for their team members on the day-to-day basis, there's a lot of focus right now on how we can support leaders and managers and kind of help them to do it as well, because I think it feels like there's always a lot of pressure. It always comes back to leaders and managers that have to enable how it always comes back to them doing it, them integrating it into how they do things. But I guess what we find often with leaders and managers, and it can be really senior leaders and it can be managers at any level, it's not that they don't want to do this, it's that they often feel like they're just haven't got the confidence, they haven't had the development, they've been kind of promoted through the ranks from a technical expertise and not for the emotional intelligence or their ability to understand what a role of a manager actually is, So I think it's become something that I think we're focusing on quite a lot, and that clients are seeing quite an impact from as well, in terms of actually, if we do this and show leaders and managers that it's part of it's kind of just how they do things. It's like, let's not say it's another thing to do on your to-do list. It's baking it into your approach as a leader or manager, because if you do that on a day-to-day basis, it's helping you get the job done, but doing it in a way that, like you said, sends people home safe, happy, well, productive, and all those things.
Yeah, I personally think you get two types. You get two types. Either leaders and managers who don't want to because of the way it's presented to them or the culture that it's happening in, and then you get the ones who do want to but don't know how to. And I think part of the keying the approach is understanding which camp you're in, because like you said, Vic, the sometimes it is seen as another job, whereas in fact it is the job. And I think there's that. So if that's your starting point, that's one thing. If the starting point is no, it is the job, I did get that, but I actually wouldn't have the first clue about where to start with that, then that's a different problem to solve.
And one of the things that we've done in Bellrock to help our managers on that route is we've established a Chartered Management Institute. We're now an accredited training centre in partnership with the University of Huddersfield. So we're delivering CMI Level 5 Leadership and Management Programme in-house for our own managers. So we've put 50 managers through that course this year. And one of the modules that Firm, who runs that, has included is a DE&I module. So that, and the feedback I get, but not just about the whole program, but about that module in particular, is just how good it is. And it is that thing, is like, we can't expect managers just because they've either been there the longest, or technically they know the most, or they've achieved the most sales, or whatever measure of success they've had. Let's promote them. That doesn't mean they're going to be a great leader, does it? So we have to invest in them, and that's part of our commitment here. And we're going to run another 4 of those, probably another 60 managers that we'll put through that. We're running level 3 next year, which is massively oversubscribed. Level 3 being new and aspiring managers. So really training and educating those managers before they even take on their first management role, so that when they land, they're already knowing what they should be doing. So.
I think that's so important. I think that I was talking to a client about it actually recently. We were saying it's almost like there's things are obviously very different now, and we can do what like you're saying, we can do a lot to kind of people that are coming through the development and career development pathway now. But I guess it's quite interesting because when you think of the managers and leaders that are in position now and that have come through that more historic route of being promoted based on technical ability or like you say, performance, whatever, you wonder, if you ask them the question, would you like to be a manager? now you know what it is and what it involves and what it what the skill set is, and and you've got opportunities to develop those things. Do you want to take that? Would you want to be on that path, or do you want to take a different path, which actually you can still go on a trajectory that isn't, that's a development pathway, career development wise, that doesn't involve managing people? But actually, I just think it's a really interesting, if you put some kind of leaders and managers in a room, whether you could have that conversation to say, actually, there's different pathways, aren't there? It shouldn't have to be that you have to go through the management kind of pathway, I guess, to progress.
And it's a classic. It's a kind of talk about we talked about academia earlier, didn't we? And when I worked in academia, the classic was the better at academia or research you were, the more you got promoted, the less you did the one thing you were good at.
Yeah.
And that applies more generally in the world of work. But and it's not for everybody, is it?
That sounds like you've got a fantastic program in place in house already, John. But can you just talk to us a little bit more broadly about, so what's the role of leaders and kind of what do you expect from them at Bellrock in terms of creating the right culture for your employees?
I think first and foremost, it's leading by example and being authentic in the way that you lead. I think people sniff that out. They're like, it's like dogs smelling fear, isn't it? Like they just know when a leader's not being authentic. And I think that those leadership values that we've got. We really do rely on our managers and our senior leaders to lead by example. And for me, it's about being more transformational than transactional. So we're engaging. If you look at transformational leadership, it's about leading by example. It's about rolling the sleeves up, not asking somebody to do a job you're not prepared to do yourself. It's about engaging everybody in the solution, but making the decision as a leader yourself. It's all of those kind of traits. Not micromanaging, trusting your team, empowering them, and they're the traits for me that I look to see in a great leader here. And we guide them. We give them the tools to do that, but ultimately it does fall on them and their ability to connect with their team and inspire them.
How does that play out specifically in relation to health and well-being, John? Like what are you looking for? I mean, obviously leading by example is still in there, but what role are you looking for leaders to play when it comes to creating a sort of a health and well-being culture and a good environment for staff?
Sure, I think there's two things really. It's the way that they engage their team, the way that they have conversations with their team, in a respectful way, but leaving room for assertive conversations about performance if needed. But it's caring. I think most importantly, it's about caring about them. It's having that conversation, and my manager cares about me is one of our staff survey questions that we score off the charts on, and it's just checking in. Are you okay? You don't see me self today. You don't see me normal self. Is everything all right? It's little things really that just demonstrate that you care, as well as the more fundamental stuff around the habits that you have. So the way that you demand deadlines from your team, the way the pressure you put on them, the working hours you keep, the way you communicate with them out of hours, or whatever it might be. That's the hard stuff. But the soft stuff for me is the more important thing. It's like, how do you demonstrate to your team you actually care about them and you're interested in them?
I think that's the thing, isn't it? I think when you talk to managers about well-being, if you just kind of, they immediately think, I suppose the natural kind of go-to would be, I need to be nicer, I need to be more caring, I need to be having those conversations, see how people are feeling, and it's all like that sorts of stuff that's conjured up. And I guess what we try and do a lot when we're in our kind of programs and the models that we base our training on around for managers is around communicating that thing around well-being and performance. So it is about well-being, it is about all those things, and creating the right environment and the space for people to thrive, and asking at the, how are you today, or if you're noticing things that aren't quite, it's not like you to, is everything okay, do you want, all those things are important, but you need to be able to do that in the sense that you can still go into those performance reviews and still have those challenging conversations. So it's how you balance that, isn't it, and how you create that.
So how's your message changed, Vikkie and Ben? How's that changed since COVID, since we've moved to more remote working? Because I find it much more difficult to engage a team remotely at distance, partly because of this, right? This
yeah.
It's much harder to engage people when you're not in the room with them. Doesn't mean you can't attempt to do it, but I just think the effectiveness of it's much harder. So how have you adapted that with your clients since COVID?
Well, it's a challenge we hear a lot from our clients in terms of, managers are telling us that all the things that you've just said, really, managers are telling us it's hard for them. And they're hearing it from employees. I don't have enough face time. I don't have enough interaction. I think that's changed over, how many years are we now? I don't know, 4 or 5, 4 years into it. I think it has changed, and we've had to adapt and put different things in place. So whilst it was in the depths of the pandemic, I know a lot of managers were doing kind of more social things with their teams online. So, maybe on a Friday, late afternoon on a Friday, we just get together and have a closeout kind of session. It's not about work. It's more of a social, how have you got on? Absolutely. But what we all doing at the weekend, just making sure that they were, and it sounds a bit managed because it had to be, didn't it, I guess, when we physically couldn't see each other. And I think that over time that's changed and evolved. And I think that your point earlier about the authenticity is really important, because organizations can say, well, you need to do this and you need to create these things more. But if it's not in that person's natural style or gift, it's just not going to feel great, is it? If you're all going on a call at 3 p.m. on a Friday and sitting there thinking, oh God, why are we all here and we're not doing it right? So I think there's a lot about giving managers that creativity and space and innovation to be able to do it in the ways that they feel like it's authentic and theirs. So obviously there's more opportunity now to meet up. I know that there's still a lot of remote working and hybrid things going on, but it's also about how much the organization kind of creates and how much the manager kind of creates. I think there's that kind of balance as well, because I think, they're going into the office less means that actually let's think about how we use that time. Can we do it in a way that where we get all our team together on the same day, do our face-to-face do our big meetings together, use that time. Don't all go into the office and go into client calls and separate meetings where you're not using that opportunity. So it's about I think we've got to be a bit more proactive, and I think we've got to think a little bit more planfully about how we do it. But I do think there's still space to do it authentically in your own way.
Yeah, you're aware, I did some research on myself, and one of the things I looked into when I did my research was the way that we make friendships at work. Some great research out there around the criteria that need to be in place for us to make friends, and it is about having things. It is about personality. It is about having things in common. It is about face to face. At the time, this research predated COVID, but it was about the opportunity to interact face to face and to work on shared projects and initiatives together. So if the personality and the shared interest bit was there, you needed to create this environment where people were pushed together to work on shared projects, to get shared success and shared failure together. And I'd love to see a rerun of that now, because I'm sure it's changed, or it's evolved. It's probably evolved, not changed completely.
Yeah, and I think there's an innovation piece in that as well. I think, isn't there? I think after the pandemic, a lot of I remember there was an interview with, I think it was like the chief exec of one of the big four consultancies, and they got a lot of flack straight after the pandemic for being essentially for forcing people back into the office, not in a kind of Jacob Rees-Mogg way, but in a kind of this is but where they were coming from, it wasn't a matter of trust. It was about, this is what our clients need, because they look to us for innovation, and innovation doesn't always all come from, or the maximum level of innovation that you can have isn't going to come out of loads and loads of Teams calls. However good the technology, however good the collaboration tools, we need to be in a room creating deep relationships with each other. And then from those relationships come conversations, and from those conversations come innovation. So I actually think, not necessarily like mandating office presence, but what Vikkie was saying in terms of the hybrid model, but using that consciously and using the data that you collect as well to ensure that employee voice is going into that and how they want to use that time together, holding the organisation and its leaders and managers accountable for making sure that is constructive time, and it isn't just drifting in, say, yeah, we've ticked the hybrid box, hybrid is available, so just go in and see what happens. It's more about using that time together to create the social connections, to create the innovation, and just create that business resilience, if you like.
We see that a lot with young workers, early careers. The fact that we're not in the office very much is really damaging to their development. They don't even understand sometimes basic office etiquette, basic timekeeping. I'm not going to throw everybody in the same box, right? But it's really hard for them to learn by what they see around them. They haven't got that peer learning going on around them when they're sat in their space at home and doing it over Teams. It's just not the same. It's much harder to induct them and onboard them and get them up to speed with the way you want to work as a team if they're only in the office 1 or 2 days a week.
Yeah, I can totally see that. That's it's probably going to be another good piece of research for you coming up there, John. I think I'm
done. 6 years, Vikkie. 6 years. I'm not going there again.
Well, go back to where we started with the conversation. It's much harder to have fun on Teams, right, than it is in person.
I don't know. I'm having some fun today.
Well,
with you
today's an exception. Today's an exception.
You need to, Vikkie. You need to get out more.
I do.
I've been telling you that for years.
This is a good time. Oh dear. Okay, well, I think that's really interesting. I think kind of the manager capability theme is just one that I think is really quite big right now. I mean, is that something that you're focusing on quite a lot at Bellrock of late? Is that something you're doing?
Yeah, completely. If you look at we built our first career pathway document last year. We did a piece of work last year that was I call it sneaky important, and we job leveled every role. It's another one of these things that big organisations have to do that small organisations don't necessarily do. So we job leveled all of our 1,600 roles. So we've got 7 people into one of 7 job levels. And we did that for lots of reasons, but reward and benefits, streamlining, that kind of thing. But actually, creating the career pathway was probably the biggest side effect of that, because we go, okay, right, you're operating at a level 5 now. So that might be team leader, supervisor level. And you aspire to operate as a manager, which is level 4. So we can now tell you what sort of qualifications you need, what breadth and depth of experience you need, what the line management responsibilities might look like at that level, and therefore what development you might need to get to that speed. And then also, these are the behaviours that we're going to expect you to demonstrate at that level 4 level. So not only is it a performance management tool for managing you where you are now, but we're able to paint a picture for you of what that development roadmap looks like for you to get from here to here to here to here to here. So somebody could look at that career pathway and think, I know what it takes to get to do John's job at level 1, or to do Fred's job at level 3 or level 5 or whatever. There's a roadmap there that anybody can look at and think, I know what my next 5-10 years might look like at Bellrock. And development's at the heart of that.
Well, that's like we said before, really. That sounds like a really proactive way to do it, so that everyone's got absolute visibility of kind of what they're, what it entails and what the role is and what the full role is and what the development needs might be to get there. So it makes perfect sense to kind of introduce something like that.
And it sounds, John, like your managers are much more in that camp of they want to do the right thing in terms of their role in relation to health, safety, wellbeing conversations, rather than don't want to and need persuading. How are you helping them to do that? What support are you giving them to give them the skills they need to do that?
Yeah, I think creating from a development perspective, recruiting our first learning and development manager last year, Fern. She's been awesome. You know, she's built all this stuff from scratch. I know I get to sit on a podcast like this and take all the credit for it, but Fern, our learning development manager, Sophie Chivers, our head of organisation development. She was a brand new appointment at Bellrock. She used to be an HR business partner, and we developed her into a head of OD role. And she's transformed this whole agenda. So, you know, creating that functionality. You know, we've now got Myers-Briggs practitioners in-house in the business running MBTI team builds. You know, we've got a queue to the end of the year now of team builds. We can't do enough of them. You know, it's creating this development agenda that people just, and it's free, right? They do, the hardest thing I say to people, if you want a team build, find me a venue. That's the hardest thing. You find a venue, we're there. There's no charge. If you want to do Myers-Briggs, there's a small cost for the assessment, but our time's free. You know, the CMI leadership program is free. The in-house IOSH managing safety course is free. You know, there's no obstacles other than you freeing the time up to be there, and committing the time. If you do the CMI, committing the time to, you know, do the assignments, do the background reading, whatever it needs. So I think, to your question, Manny, it's creating the resources. And that's why I feel blessed that we had the opportunity to do that from scratch, because I could just say, right, well, I know I'm going to need this, and this. How do I go about building that?
And are you connecting the that skill build to the data that you've got for the teams? From you mentioned your survey. Is that kind of brought together so they're actually applying the skills to the specific team situation?
Well, yeah, we don't analyse it down to perhaps that granular level. I mean, but certainly by division, when we look at, so we measure a set of inputs in the staff survey that are easy to fix. So I have a face-to-face meeting with my manager at least once a month, right? That's an input. That's something you can just do. And what we do is we track that and plot that against output measures like engagement, like net promoter, like happiness. And I'm going to do a LinkedIn post about this in the next couple of weeks. But the data is incredible, right? So it's a straight line. It's a straight line between input measures like DE&I, like conditions for success, and output measures like happiness, engagement, and net promoter. So the more that you do the input stuff, the better engaged your colleagues will be, the happier they'll be, the more likely they are to recommend you as an employer to other people. And that's not really, shouldn't really be that shocking, should it? If we treat people fairly, if we reward them, if we recognize them, if we look after them well, guess what? They're going to be happier. They're going to be better engaged. It's like great research, isn't it? It tells you what you already know. But the data.
If you don't have the data, you don't know.
Exactly, and that's part of my argument internally, is to put this data in front of managers and say, look, if you want your teams to be happier, you've got to do this stuff. And this is the argument that says that, you know, you will be on this line. If you do more of this stuff, your people will feel happier. So it's kind of on you, really. You know, you need to do more of these inputs.
And just kind of coming around a bit then in terms of some of those kind of data points and those drivers for how people are feeling in the organisation. Just wanted to kind of talk a little bit more around, so it's kind of going back, I guess. We've kind of moved into the more forward-thinking culture and the kind of exciting stuff. I think, kind of going back into the world of kind of pressure and stress, I guess, because it's all part of this bigger picture, isn't it? We talk about it a lot, because even now I think people, language is so important, isn't it? People kind of confuse the terms, don't they? And pressure's seen as bad. And obviously a lot of the work we do is saying pressure isn't bad, actually. Stress is bad. We don't want to create stress, but creating the right amount of pressure, positive pressure that's well supported, but that's stretching and challenging people is a great way to manage your team members and enable them to achieve what they need to achieve, develop and push themselves beyond it, but feel supported to do so. I just wondered if you kind of did some work, anything around that at Bellrock in terms of kind of those things around kind of balancing pressure and performance, and how you kind of look at that, and anything that you're doing around that, really. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I've done less here than I've done in previous roles, and obviously my doctoral research was all about stress, I haven't felt the need to do it as much. So some of the indicators of poor psychological or poor psychosocial conditions in our business are just not as prevalent, and I'm not sure why we're any different, because we are a high pressure organisation. But I kind of quite like that definition that way back in the management standards that I thought we did a really great job of defining the difference between pressure and stress being the adverse reaction to prolonged or excessive pressure. I don't think that's or other adverse workplace factors such as bullying, harassment, that kind of thing. But I really like it because it's a really great way of saying to managers, look, it's okay to have that difficult conversation. It's okay to performance manage somebody if they're not performing. It's how you do those things.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And I mean, maybe we don't need to do it here because that's the environment we're creating. I don't know. I haven't quite figured it out. But in other environments I've worked in, it was an educational piece. So going back to that stuff that we did back at the bank in the Bradford and Mingley days, it was the success of that was an all manager education program, half-day session, just educating managers about the difference and opening their eyes, to it, because they were afraid to have conversations. They were afraid to sort of manage people because, they'll get stressed, they'll go off sick or whatever. And you say, well, yeah, if they're going to go off sick, they're going to go off sick, right? There's nothing you can do about that. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't be having a robust conversation with them in a fair and a proportionate way, And once you'd empowered them, suddenly the language changed and the landscape changed. So I haven't done as much at Bellrock. I haven't needed to, if I'm honest. None of our metrics around sickness absence or staff survey data or input or output data indicates that we are in an environment which is particularly with particular problem with that. And yet we've got call centers, we've got lots of remote working, environments. We've got kind of high demand, low control environments in our business. Yet I don't know what it is, but we just don't seem to have that as an issue.
If you could find out what that golden nugget is, John, you would literally have the answer to, all of the problems.
Well, and I'm answering my own question because I haven't actually stopped to think about it. So maybe I'm answering my own question, but we know that manager support is a factor that helps mitigate the effect of high demands, low control. And we know from our staff survey data that people really like their manager, think they care about them. So there's probably, I'd have to analyse it, but there's probably some good data in the survey that actually answers my own question about why we don't necessarily have a problem with it. So
no, it's definitely worth doing. I mean, did you do, I know you mentioned, and our audience loves to hear about research because a lot of the approach that we take is very much rooted in the research and kind of moved into the practical application. Yeah, you did some research around stressing call centres, didn't you? Is that what you were referring to there? Is there any kind of insights that would be interesting to share at this point?
How long have you got, Vikkie? This is 6 years.
Well, I don't get out, life. John, so I've got forever. So
it was 6 years of my life. It was an intervention study in a call centre, and it's a utilities company. And what was fabulous about this opportunity was that the call centre was 1,000 people. So it was a quasi-experimental study. I had a control group and I had an intervention group, and I designed a stress risk assessment tool that really came out of my practitioner background. And it was an action research study. So it meant I was part of the study. I was delivering the training and the interventions. I was talking to the managers. It was longitudinal, so it was over 18 months. It was mixed methods. I know you're completely mad for all the data that it generated, but it was mixed methods. So not only was I surveying the intervention group and the control group, I also ran a whole host of focus groups with them, which helped bring that quantitative data alive as well. So the outcomes, the results at the end, the kind of data synthesis I did felt super, super authentic. Like I was seeing things and hearing things in the data which I knew to be true because of action research. I was embedded into the study. So I loved the study. Now, what did I find out? Well, if intervention failed, right? So it didn't do what I wanted it to do for different reasons. And it's not a success story, I don't think. But for good, there's no such thing as bad data. That's the first thing to say.
No.
So the reason it failed was just because of the sheer high turnover of staff within the call centre. And what the output of that was how on earth do you embed an organisational health intervention into an environment that has such a transitory workforce. Like I think for over 18 months, I think I lost 2/3 of my sample, right, in 18-month period. So that's data that's longitudinal data I can't really track. But more importantly, they are management behaviours and education that's gone into people who've then left, and new people that have come in who aren't necessarily getting that same level of education. So there was a lot to learn from it. But ironically, the thing that I learned most is not something I necessarily set out to find out. And I met the call centre leadership team, and I said to them, look, I'm coming in to talk about, work-related stress and pressure and what have you. And they said, well, I can tell you now, it's not work-related. It's all these other issues they've got in their lives. And I thought, it's what you hear from managers, right? They go, it's not work, it's their own lives.
It's not work, it's nothing to do with us.
So what I thought I needed to do, and I've got to prove them wrong, right? So I developed a measure that I used GHQ-12 as my measure of psychological well-being. And I sewed into GHQ-12 3 questions that I called my non-work stress indicator tool or something. It's like 3 questions, and it said something, and the questions were phrased in the same way as GHQ-12. So you just drop them in and they wouldn't know they were any different. But the questions were stuff like, coming to work is an escape from issues at home, or it's questions like that. There were 3 of them. And I decided that if you scored positively against 2 of those 3, that meant you had non-work stressors in your life, right? So I could separate, I could control for the data, I could prove there was no difference in psychological well-being between people with issues at home, people who had no issues at home, and prove that it was all work. And one Sunday morning, I was running this data, and they were bloody right, Vikkie. They were absolutely spot on. Psychological ill health in people with non-work stress indicators was 3 times worse than people who had no non-work stress indicators.
Wow!
And it didn't really. Okay. And so I ran several different psychological, several different tests on it, and it didn't matter. I came up with about the same impact. So if you look at for those people watching that know GHQ-12, it's a positive score out of 12. People who were, if you score, I think probable mental health is if you score 4+. If you score more than 4 plus, it's an indicator of probable mental health. So people had non-work issues at home were scoring around about 7 out of 12. And people who didn't have any non-work stresses were scoring about 1.5 to 2. And it was like, oh my God. So I went running in the kitchen and I said to my wife, I'm like, you won't believe it. I found this out. It said, and people who've got this issue, they're like 3 times. And she just looked at me and went, yeah, I could have told you that. And I'm like, what do you mean? She says, well, if you think about it, they've got caring responsibilities and financial worries and relationship difficulties and kids and illnesses and all sorts of stuff. And I'm like, yeah, okay. So that, to be honest, that then took me into a whole other area of research around the role of the employer in supporting people with non-work issues. So like I say, there's no such thing as bad data. It's just you think you're doing a study that's going in this direction, and then it swerves off and goes into a different direction.
Do you think that's specific to a call centre environment, or do you think it generalises beyond that? I mean, you think it would probably.
Well, of course, that's one of the limitations, isn't it, of a study like mine, is you can't generalise it. I certainly can generalise it, but there's a risk in doing that. I think there's varying degrees, Ben. I think that it was a very young workforce. They were a low demographic in terms of social status. They were drawn from a population that was employed immediately around that location. So there was a lot of family issues. I think it was a high significance in that local workforce. But I would put good money on, if I ran that study across different sectors, different employers, that you would see an element of that. Now, whether it's 3 times or whether it's more or less in other workforce, but the power of it, and that came through in the focus groups. Particularly with the team leaders, the managers and team leaders said, look, they were almost like counsellors, just sat amongst their teams, dealing with people's problems all day. It was emotionally draining for them. It really was. And funny enough, having 6 or 7 managers on a focus group was actually quite cathartic for them, because it was the first time they'd ever really stopped to talk about it. And one of them would say, do you know what? It's like Jeremy Kyle. This morning, I've had a teenage pregnancy. I've had an affair. I've got a divorce. I've got
wow.
Literally, this is what's going
on. And they need to decompress, don't they? They need to, have
totally,
the opportunity. Yeah.
Totally. And one of the things that I was able to do with the data is actually understand the difference between good managers and poor managers. So there was a measure, I can't remember which measure I used to identify where good, I think it was the deployment of the intervention. So where managers had deployed it well, there were certain measures that scored significantly above those that hadn't deployed it within the intervention group. So then I kind of flipped it around and I did an analysis of the cohort of who I thought were my good managers and those that weren't. And that's where I saw a significant difference in psychological well-being to poor well-being. And then I was then able to synthesize that with the focus groups and find out that the definitions of good managers were managers that were accessible, they had good work knowledge, they were available at any time. There were some themes that were coming out of the focus groups that were and that was pretty landmark. I think that at the time that was pretty landmark in my research, because most of the research on stress is quantitative. There's not very much out there that's qualitative or mixed methods. And what I was able to do was to bring that alive and really flesh out, okay, so you've done a survey that says X is greater than Y, but you don't know why. And I was able to go, do you know what? Managers are really super critical for helping individuals cope with the pressure of their work. That's not news. That's not PhD worthy research. What was worthy was the bit that said, and this is the reason why. Because these managers are more available, they're more accessible, their knowledge of the best managers are the ones that have been call center operators themselves, who knew the job, right? So there was just some real strong themes in there around what a good manager looked like that mapped onto stuff like transformational leadership. I apologize. Literally, this is 6 years of my life. I could literally talk about this all day.
No, it's really interesting, and yeah, as a business, Robertson Cooper is very much research driven. So you've found some friends. Let's just say in that respect.
Well, in the day, I talked a lot to Ivan about it, and he was good enough to share some research he'd done and was aware of elsewhere. So it was an awesome experience. I mean, I did question my sanity at times doing it alongside a full-time job, but it was a pretty rewarding experience.
I can totally imagine. Well, that has been so interesting. If you don't mind, I'd like to introduce a couple of kind of different style of questions for the closeout that are more focused on you, John. So we're going to get personal.
I'm super nervous now.
Don't worry, I've not been digging or doing any digging or anything like that. No, I just thought it'd be really nice for the audience to hear just a bit more of a personal experience from yourself in terms of the kind of topics that we've been discussing. So kind of being in the senior role that you're in a growing organisation, how do you personally manage pressure? And how do you kind of balance that flexibility with the need for boundaries and home and life and all those things, that interface that we're just talking about? So just a bit more of a kind of personal take on that would be really nice to hear.
Separating home and work is much more challenging. My job is predominantly based at home. I do travel a lot, and so it's very difficult to shut the door. I mean, I'm fortunate enough that one of our bedrooms is my office, and I can shut the door and close the door and work away. But that takes real discipline. And I know historically, people have thought that working at home was a cushy number, but I can tell you I work much harder at home than I do in the office because I'm not traveling. There's very little distraction, so you tend to work harder. In terms of my own personal coping strategies, I'm Buddhist, so I meditate a lot. I think giving me a sense of presence and mindfulness is something which is hugely critical to me. I can tell. Others around me can tell if I've not meditated for a few days because I find it a real way that headspace that I get by just clearing my head for 15 or 20 minutes a day is hugely beneficial. And I think that concentrating on the here and now and not worrying about what went before, not dwelling on what's gone before, and not worrying about what's to come, and staying in the present as much as you can is critical for me. I don't think I could do my job without that frame of mind. And exercise. I can tell when I've not done a walk or been on the bike or what have you. They're my critical things.
And are you an
And
outdoor
then
cyclist, John, or are you a?
I have been, yeah, but I'm also a Peloton
Me
tart. So,
too.
Oh, you
Me
too.
so
too.
yeah, I love my Peloton. I do love my Peloton. So, but that's mainly a winter thing. I live in the Yorkshire Dales, so I'm very blessed
Oh,
with
lovely. Yeah.
fantastic rides on my doorstep. But I don't get out as much as I should. But yeah,
It's easy. Mine's in the garage. You see, it's very easy. Just there's very little excuse and barrier, isn't there, to be able to kind of go out there? Is there's
it's yeah,
get on the bike.
it is terrific. I do love it. I got mine in lockdown actually. I ordered it
Same.
really early on,
Yeah.
I don't belong to a gym. It's all Peloton for me.
No, yeah, absolutely. And I agree. We've all got to find the things, haven't we? We know where we get our energy from. We know that, the pressures there and the home and life pressures are there and that the strains are there. But I think it's great to have an awareness of what works for you and, and whether that's things within your day to day as well that you need to practice to make sure that you don't I noticed, from the post-pandemic world I used to do if I went to see a client, I'd travel and I'd do one meeting and then I'd travel back. And now I can speak to 5, 6 clients a day.
Yeah.
And that's a huge shift. It's great in terms of, yes, I'm not traveling and I'm not getting that kind of exhaustion, but it's a very different kind of working style, right? It's kind of, it's being tuned in and being switched on, in many different ways, at a high volume throughout the day. So yeah, we've talked quite a bit about that in our team about how we manage some of those things and just think about them a little bit more proactively and like you say, have that presence of mind really in terms of focus. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
So, John, can I ask a question? We were about good days at work, right? You know that, but that's what this podcast is, the Good Day at Work podcast. What's a good day at work for you?
Well, I had a really good day yesterday. So, good day for me is being in team meetings where my team are bristling with ideas, and I am literally empowering them to go and do stuff. So I've got a couple of grads in the HR team. I had a meeting with them yesterday where I need to set up it's my own personal learning from the staff survey, right? So I need to, my HR team's now over 20 people. So when it was only like 8 or 10 of us, it was easy to get everybody together. It's much harder when it's 20 plus. So I'm thinking, right, once a month, I need to do a kind of download of what's going on in the business and allow them to talk to each other in a structured way around what's going on, right? And I thought I could design this. I could put some time and effort into this, but actually I've got 2 grads in my team who I'm just going to give this as a challenge to. And I'm not going to tell them how to do it. I'm going to tell them what my output is. This is what I want to achieve. You guys go away and design it. You design the agenda, you design the participation, and come back to me. And their eyes lit up. Because I think when they get a Teams message from me that says, "Have you got 5 minutes?" They're like, "Oh no, what does he want now?" But I'm really empowering. So I will say to them, like, "Okay, this is what I need. Right, this is the output. I'm on holiday for a couple of weeks now, and I'll be back. And then let's get a meeting, and you can talk to me what your thoughts are." And their eyes light up, like they've got right, okay, and then they're off. And then one of them messaged me and went, "We've already got our meetings in the diary. We've already got some ideas." I love that. I love that. Empowering the team.
Trust,
even if
autonomy.
Yeah, totally trust them. Even if they make some mistakes, even if my team make mistakes, they're doing it in a safe space where they can learn from it, because they will learn much more from the errors they make than they will from the successes. And it's creating that safe space for them to go out there, be bold in their decision making, take risks, and know that they'll do that, and I'll have their back. Right? I'm not going to. I stand in front of them when there's flack coming our way, and I stand behind them when there's glory coming our way. So a good day for me, Ben, is where I get meetings like that, progressive, value add stuff. The stuff that drains me is when I'm dealing with problems and challenges, which inevitably in the world of HR you do. It can be a pretty tough place sometimes. Good example of that is, we do get deaths in service, so we are dealing with families and bereaved and colleagues that have lost loved ones, and that's really, really tough. And that isn't a good day.
No, and the thing is, not every day can be a good day, is it? Can it? You know, it's not a night. We measure it. We talk about the benefits of it. We talk about, you know, personal benefits, organizational benefits, but that's not an idealistic thing. There's an acknowledgement in there that not every day can be a good day. You just want to maximize the number of days that you have that are, I think, is the key to that.
That's true, and like if I draw a Buddhist, and I'm not going to get all spiritual with you, I promise, but if you look at that, this is the difference between happiness and joy, right? So we can have days where we're happy and we can have days where we're sad, and if we only ever judge how good we feel about our happiness, then we are going to feel bad about ourselves at times, and we need to do that. We need to feel sad sometimes, but what we need to do is step back and consider the longer journey, the joy that we're taking through life on those ups and downs. So even if we have a good day, even if we have a bad day, we're able to look at the broader picture and see what that journey looks like for us. That takes account of, you know, both the good and the bad days that we have.
Yeah, being thankful for what we do have within that.
Completely, yeah.
I'd just like to ask another one, if that's okay. Given your extensive kind of career and your experience and all the things that we've talked about today, what's the most important lesson you've learned about health and well-being in your career so far? And you've got to pick one.
Yeah, well, look, I think I did some, we did some great stuff at the university. It was ahead of its time. We didn't take the leadership with us, right? We did not take the leadership with us on the journey and develop the business case for that, so that it didn't pass that good to great test of it building an enduring legacy. Because when you get a change in leadership, they don't naturally see the value of what you do. And at that time, so a lot of that stuff we did kind of dismantled quite quickly when I moved on. So it's not great. It wasn't great, because greatness, transcends time, I think. So what's the lesson I'd learn is really taking leadership with you on that journey. And I think how have I done that differently now? Well, look at lots of things at Bellrock, but the DE&I journey is really getting there. Like, leadership are committed to it. They recognise its importance. They're endorsing it. They're supporting it. And guess what? 300 plus people join a call when you launch a new D&I strategy. Amazing. In a business which is really demanding and people have got day jobs. They're prepared to pause for an hour and listen to it. So I think for me, my biggest lesson over the years has been getting leadership buy-in to things that you want to do, because it's absolutely critical to opening doors and changing mindsets.
Yeah, and actually, do you know what? Even if that takes a bit longer, pacey businesses don't take the time to do that. And I think even if it takes a bit longer to get that, it's always going to be worth it. Yeah,
sure. And I think, to be fair, to working at university, the pace was slower, and we were able to design and implement stuff which was probably a better quality than sometimes you're able to do. So again, in the Bellrock comparison, we didn't launch D&I last year. We could have done, but it would have been much more superficial. The integrity would have been a lot lower. It was much more important to me that we do a proper job of it. And then I tell you, when you get 300 people on the call, I'm really feeling the pressure now. Like, and I did a LinkedIn post about this. I really feel the pressure to do a really great job of this, because there's a lot of people looking at me going, yes, great words, John, but what are you actually doing about it? So, I mean, it's good pressure. I'm not stressed by it.
Accountability loop, isn't it? That's what you want.
Yeah. I'm like, blimey, do you know what? We better do a really good job of this, because if people really care. Whereas if 20 people had joined the call, I'm going, not to worry. But it's 300. Oh, bloody hell!
Absolutely.
We've got to do something about this now.
Yeah. Definitely. Look, John, it's been absolutely brilliant to meet you today and have a really good chat. I just wanted to kind of quickly summarise for everybody some of the key things that we've been through before we kind of close off. But we've talked about, and I think we've seen and heard from you about how you've managed to turn quite a few different challenges into areas for opportunity throughout your career. So I think that's a little bit of a lesson for us to take forward, and kind of to see it, have that mindset really, to see that and to see that it can be turned into into an opportunity. We talked about the benefits of integrating health, safety and well-being, and you quite rightly said, look, it's all one thing. It's all about changing behaviour no matter which way you're coming from, but obviously bringing those kind of core parts together really helps. We talked about not forgetting the basics, and I think that's a really important one not to forget. Just sometimes it's just about caring about people and caring about what you're doing and showing that in the way that you can. So yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting to hear about obviously Bellrock being an acquisition business and some of the cultural challenges that kind of sometimes presents, but how you've positively turned that into an opportunity by kind of constantly evolving your culture by taking everyone's best bits, which I think is a great model. So yeah, absolutely. Really interesting to hear about that. As you just mentioned, your huge focus on DE&I. It sounds like you're making some really great strides. So we'll have to check back in with you, I think, and get some updates on how you're going with that.
Yeah.
And then the conversation around leaders and managers. So I think your point about authentic leadership is absolutely key. Your focus on transformation rather than transactional leadership as well. Caring about people and asking the right questions and staying in tune, and like you said, those that are accessible, have the work knowledge but are available seem to kind of really have that impact on employees. Thank you for sharing your research insights as well. So we've talked about the stress in call center insights. I think the main learning out there is that you're going to find out something that you didn't think you were going to.
Always be ready.
No such thing as bad data, that's the one. And obviously there the impact of non-work factors being 3 times more impactful on psychological well-being, I should say. And obviously thank you for sharing your personal insights at the end there, because I think with well-being and good days at work, it is personal, isn't it? And I think that we all need to kind of find a way to share those things, because they really resonate with people, and other people I'm sure who are in similar roles to you or aspire to be in roles like you would be really kind of heartened to hear about how you see it and how you're doing it. So thank you for your openness, and thank you for coming on today and your time. So it's been really lovely to talk to you.
Look, thank you to you as well. I've always looked to Buxton-Cope. You've been around a long time as a business. I don't mean you necessarily personally.
Thanks, John.
Be careful what I'm saying. But, you've driven that agenda for many years, and I think you deserve a lot of thanks and appreciation for the people that in my shoes that do my job, because we look to you to drive us forward with the research work you do, with the practitioner support you give. So keep up the great work. It really does make a difference to us.
Thanks, John. I really appreciate that. That's lovely to hear.
We do, and thank you.
Yeah, with that we'll say goodbye, and we'll close the Good Day at Work podcast. Thanks for joining us. Thank you so much for listening to the Good Day at Work podcast, brought to you by Robertson-Cooper. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, like, and leave a review. Every time you do, it helps us to promote our podcast and increases the chances of others finding the show too.
For further details on Robertson-Cooper and how our science-based products deliver data-led, actionable insights that empower organisations to create more good days at work, enhance employee well-being, and support key business outcomes, head over to robertsoncooper.com. See you next time.